And that's why I'm not trying to minimize these characters. I'm sure there's some great, exciting things in their lives. They're just unknown characters. I don't know, you ever trace your family tree and there's some names in there you don't know anything about? It's probably rather good. There may not be things you'd want to know about folks in your family tree, but here's some characters, and they'll be in heaven. Assuming they died faithfully to the Lord. And so Ibzan, Elon, Abdon, remember that. Tolajar, Jephthah. And those are 6 names that you can learn just by learning 2 words. I love that aspect of that. So the judges are, let's say them together as much as we can. Do I need to back up so we can get back to where the judges are listed? Othniel, Ehud, Shamgar, Deborah, Gideon, Abimelech, Tolajar, Jephthah, Ibzan, Elon, Abdon, Samson, Eli, Samuel. That's not that hard. And you'll be glad if you'd learn those. And seriously, they're not on the final test to get into heaven. At least I hope they're not. But they are not. Now then, we get to a real important character in the Bible, and well, I got to get back where I want to be, and that is Samson. We know more about Samson than we do about any of the other judges, except Samuel, and because of his place in the life of Saul and his place in the life of David. We know more about this character here. And yet what we know about him is remarkable in the sense that he's not the godliest person on earth. And it may be, and I say maybe, I want you to hear that the reason that we have so much details about this man who is a very fleshly man, and by fleshly I mean he's not spiritual. He has problems with women in his life. And so here's this man that is a fleshly man, and it may be that he is a living example of fleshly Israel. Think about the description of what happens in the period of the judges. Every man did what was, the rest of that? What was right in his own eyes. I mean, the Levites obviously weren't doing their job of teaching the people about God, and it's obvious the parents didn't do a good job teaching their children. And so whenever we get to the life of Samuel and Samson, we need to take some time to talk about the things that transpire. The interesting thing is what happens before his birth. His birth is announced in a very, very special way, and it is first announced to Samson's mother. You look at it starts in chapter 13, and verse 1 talks about the fact that there was that oppression by the Philistines. The Philistines are the nation that that is responsible for giving the name to Palestine. That's why Palestine is called Palestine, because it is a form of saying the Philistine word. And so that's interesting in and of itself, but they are a major character in the Bible. David fights Goliath. Who's Goliath? What's his nationality? Don't say he's a giant from New York Giants or somewhere, but he's a Philistine. And so you've got the oppression of the Philistines, and they were delivered into the hand of the Philistines. Look at verse 1. For how many years? You start adding up all of these years in the book of Judges, and it's remarkable how many years are involved in this. There was a certain man from Zorah of the family of the Danites. Wonder, is this a good tribe or a bad tribe? Well, we'll find out if we get to study those last 4 chapters, that the Danites did not get their land's inheritance. They were ungodly people, the Danites as a tribe, and they were almost wiped out because of their immorality and their ungodliness. And we won't deal with that now. We may deal with it when we get to chapter 17 and 18 of this book. But the man's name was Manoah. You know, if you'll rehyphenate that and make that Ma Noah, then you could say he's the mother of Noah. Now, I don't know if that'll help you remember it or not, but that's the way I remember the man's name. His wife was barren and had no child. And the angel of the Lord appeared to the woman and said to her, "You are barren and have borne no children, and you shall conceive and bear a son." Can you imagine that? "Therefore, be careful not to drink wine or similar drink, and not to eat anything unclean." What does that mean, anything unclean? Is that don't eat things got dirt on it? What's unclean? What makes something you would eat unclean? It has to do with the animals. Noah took clean animals and unclean animals into the ark. Now you have to get to Leviticus chapter 11 to learn the distinction. We're talking about four-footed animals. What an unclean animal is, an unclean animal or clean animal had to have two things characteristic of it. It had to chew, I'm going to say it the Alabama way, so you folks from the real South, chew the cud. But if you're from, if you're highly educated, it's to chew the cud. And I guess C-U-D does spell cud, better than it spells could, but all my life. And that is, it regurgitates its food and chews it again and then swallows it again. And so and the other thing was, unlike a horse's foot, think of a horseshoe, an unclean animal has a cloven foot. That means it's divided. And so there are animals that have a cloven foot. Anybody here ever eaten any pig's feet? It's a cloven foot, right? I mentioned within the last 2 months that I'd never had pig's feet. And so thank you, Mary Brown, for bringing me a pig's feet. I've now eaten pig's feet. And privately, I'll tell you what I think about it. But no, I'm just amazed how many bones there are in a pig's foot. Okay, I don't know that. Anyway, but you couldn't eat it. Why could you not eat swine? Why could you not eat? You couldn't eat bacon? Why? What's wrong with the pigs? Got a cloven foot. It doesn't chew the cud. And so they couldn't eat it. And so if I were a Jew, and you told me, if I had one taste of bacon and pork chops and ham. If I were a Jew, I think I'd be like King Agrippa if I met you. Almost thou persuadest me to be a Christian. I think one of the joys of being a Christian is to be able to eat bacon and ham and things of that nature. And but he said to her, "Don't you eat anything that's unclean." And so the amazing thing, after that revelation of that, she goes to her husband and tells her husband, "A man of God came to me." Angel of the Lord, man of God came to me, and his countenance was like the countenance of the angel of God, very awesome. But I did not ask where he was from, and he did not tell me his name. I think it's interesting. If you've got the New King James and you see the word angel capitalized, the angel of God, the angel of the Lord, probably it would do you a whole lot more good if you just make that a little letter, and then because it's capitalized because there are those who believe that almost every time the expression angel of the Lord is found in the Old Testament has reference to Jesus, and it may, but it's ironic that there are times when it is not capitalized, because even those who hold that view will say, well, that really wasn't Jesus in the Old Testament. And so, instead of getting all upset about that, I can read this story without ever knowing whether Jesus is there or not. Does that make sense? Angel of the Lord appeared to him. He was obviously a man of God, and he said to me, "You shall conceive and bear a son. Drink no wine, similar drink, nor eat anything, for the child shall be a Nazarite to God from the womb to the day of his death." Manoah prayed to the Lord and said, "Please let the man of God whom you've sent come to me again and teach us what we should do for this child when he is born." And so there is the announcement of that birth, and there is that announcement that is made to the fathers. You've got to talk a little bit about what a Nazarite. Was Jesus a Nazarite? I thought the Bible said he went and lived in Nazareth and he was a Nazarite. Oh, a Nazarene. You notice that, right? There's a great deal of difference between a Nazarene and a Nazarite. What charge did they make about Jesus in reference to eating and drinking? He came eating and drinking. And I don't mean, hard drinking. That's not what I'm trying to say. But he was a Nazarene. And that's just a resident of Nazareth. But there was a vow, the Nazarite vow, and we don't have time to look at it in its entirety. It could have been made for a lifetime, but it could have been temporary and short in nature. And I find it interesting, if you'll read Numbers chapter 6 carefully, a woman could make the Nazarite vow. And obviously I had known that before I prepared for this study, because when I went over to Numbers chapter 6, I had highlighted the word woman, so I'd notice it the next time I went over there, and I did. So, if you'd asked me, does the Bible say anything about a woman being a Nazarite? I would have said, I don't think so. But it does, so a woman could make this vow. Now, the fulfillment of the vow was one would shave his head. That was an evidence of the fulfillment of the Nazarite vow. It was a vow of consecration and devotion. And so it was a time when an individual, if I talk about Catholic Lent and giving up things for Lent, I suspect that's where that comes from. But being a Nazarite goes much, much deeper and has a totally different kind of value. Somebody who in Lent gives up pig's feet. For the next 40 days, I'm not going to eat pig's feet. I think I could do it. I think that'd be a good thing for me to give up. It was not bad. I enjoyed eating it. I really did. But you give up something that you normally wouldn't have anyway. Sometimes that's the abuse that's made of it, but not in the biblical sense. It was a very, very serious thing for that individual. And so there are individuals who, though the word Nazarite is not used in relationship to them, sometimes it would talk about the fact that they would not eat the grapes, or they would not eat any of the produce of the grapes. And John the Baptist is one such individual. And so there are some characters in there that perhaps that is a reference to the Nazarite vow that is there. And so here is this young man that before he was born, because what his mother would eat would impact his own physical being, that she was told. And so the man of God listened to the prayer of and so there is that announcement that is made to the Father. And so the angel comes and he makes the same announcement to the Father. After all of this transpires, look down at verse 15. Manoah said to the man of the Lord, "Let us detain you, and we will prepare a young goat for you." And the angel of the Lord said to Manoah, "Though you detain me, I will not eat your food. But if you offer a burnt offering, you must offer it to the Lord." For Manoah did not know that he was the angel of the Lord. And I find that rather interesting, just that very comment that's there. Manoah said to the angel of the Lord, "What is your name? That your words come to pass, that we may honor you." And the angel of the Lord said, "Why do you ask my name, seeing it is wonderful?" Manoah took the young goat, put it upon the rock. The Lord did a wondrous thing. Manoah and his wife looked on it, and as the flame went up toward heaven, went up from the altar, the angel of the Lord ascended in the flame of fire. Absolute confirmation of this being a messenger. I think Bill Jr., whenever he talked about Gideon, the night when Bill Jr. in this class talked about Gideon, Gideon asked for a sign may not have been a wrong thing, because the purpose of miracles was the confirmation of the messenger. And there's no doubt at all that this has that very impact on him. And verse 22, Manoah said to his wife, "We shall surely die because we have seen God." And that's why some people think that the angel of the Lord must be God. But his wife said to him, "If the Lord has desired to kill us, he would not have accepted the burnt offering." Verse 24, she bore a son and called his name Samson, and the child grew, and the Lord blessed him. And the Spirit of the Lord began to move him, and mentions specifically some geographical places in relationship to Samson. And then all of a sudden we get to that part of the life of Samson, and that is in the next part of his life, and I've entitled it, just to have words on the slide, as the early years of Samson. And so you start the very next chapter, and so Samson sees a beautiful woman. And so I put on the slide, his eyes find him a Philistine wife. And so he comes to his parents. Well, look in verse 14, he says, he saw a woman in Timnah of the daughters of the Philistines. Anything wrong with that? Well, the Jews were forbidden to marry those who were not Jews. And so he has violated, he's violated one of the clear statements of God, and that's why we talk about him being fleshly, and I think this is evidence of it. So he went up and told his father and mother, I've seen a woman in Timnah of the daughters of the Philistines. Now therefore, get her for me as a wife. And his father and mother said to him, is there no woman among the daughters of your brethren, among all of my people, that you must go get a wife from the uncircumcised Philistines? Samson said to his father, get her for me, for she pleases me well. And so the next several verses in this chapter talks about what transpires. Obviously there's the oppression by the Philistines, but it talks about the fact that she was his wife, even though even though they had not started living together, if that makes sense. Under Judaism, a betrothal was the same as a marriage. And so the punishment for an unfaithful fiancé was the same punishment as the punishment for an unfaithful wife. Think about Joseph and Mary. Mary was with child. She never, and so some would have judged that she's an immoral woman. But Joseph, being a just man, I find that rather remarkable, showed grace to her. Those are my words in relationship to this. But he wanted to put her away privately because he was a just man. And so he was commended by the fact that the Bible talked about him being a good man. So the father and mother did not know that it was of the Lord. He was seeking an occasion to move against the Philistines, for the Lord's now going to use circumstances that are happening. Samson goes down to Timnah with his father and mother, comes to the vineyards of Timnah, and to his surprise, a young lion came roaring against him. We always think about lions only being in Africa, but there's evidence. It's widely believed that there were just regular lions in Palestine at this time. And did not David talk about the Lord delivered me out of the paw of the bear and the paw of the lion? And so there were lions that were there, and so. Sometimes he wasn't a little bobcat, not that kind of a lion that we're talking about. And so this lion comes out against him, and the Spirit of the Lord came upon Samson. And if you'll look at this, the Spirit of the Lord came upon it. That will give you an understanding of the words that are used in reference to the Holy Spirit, about the Holy Spirit coming upon an individual. And he was mighty upon him, and he tore the lion apart as one would have torn apart a young goat, though he had nothing in his hand. He didn't tell his mother and father what he had done. So he went down and talked with the woman, and she pleased Samson well. And after some times, he returned to get her. So we're in the process of getting all this marriage taken care of, and he sees that carcass of that lion. And what's unusual about it? A swarm of bees and honey were in the carcass of the lion. I find that remarkable, how all of that would transpire. But he took some of it in his hand and went along eating. He came to his father and his mother, and he gave them some, and he didn't, and they ate it, but he didn't tell them where he'd gotten it. So the father went down, verse 10, to the woman, and Samson gave a feast, for young men used to do so. And so I've entitled that as the feast of Samson. And so at this feast, he says to the Philistines, let me give you a riddle. If within 7 days you can answer this riddle, I will give you 30 changes of clothing. Now, if you cannot answer the riddle, then you'll have to give me 30 linen garments and 30 changes of clothing. And they said, okay, give us the riddle. Don't you like riddles? You know, what's red and white and what's black and white and red all over? Huh? Did you get it? Two things. A zebra is what some are saying. Anything else? Red and white, black and white and red or what? A newspaper. You didn't grow up in Alabama. How'd you know that? Anyway, here's the riddle. Out of the eater came something to eat, and out of the strong came something sweet. We know what that is. We know what the eater is, and we know what the sweetness is. Nobody else knows. And so for 3 days they couldn't explain the riddle, and it came to pass on the 7th day, they said to Samson's wife, and notice she is called his wife, entice your husband, he's called her husband, that he may explain the riddle, or else we'll burn you and your father's house with fire. That's called the direct approach of trying to get your way and everything. And Samson's wife wept and said, "You only hate," said to Samson, "you only hate me, you do not love me. You've posed a riddle to the sons of my people, but you've not explained it to me." I know your wife has never used this tone of voice and this kind of an appeal to you ever in your life. But there was one time on this earth where a wife said to her husband, it's right here, "Honey, if you really love me, you'd do this for me." I know that's never happened in your home, and don't lie about it. And so he says, "I've not explained it even to my mother and father." And she wept on him for 7 days. And you may not like what I've got up here when I talk about the 7 days, but I put that in quotation marks, at least I hope I did. But she just stayed after him and stayed after him and stayed after him, and he finally told her. And she explains the riddle to her people. So the men said on the 7th day, "What's sweeter than honey and what's stronger than a lion?" And I find this an amazing description. And husbands, don't ever refer to your wife this way. If you had not plowed with my heifer, you would not have solved the riddle. And I hope that's a figure of speech that fits in that culture. And then he says, the Spirit of the Lord came upon Samson. And he goes down to Ascalon. That's one of the large Philistine cities. He killed 30 of the men. He took their apparel, gave the changes of clothing to those who explained the riddle. So his anger was aroused and went back to his father's house. And what happens? Samson's wife was given to his companion. And look at this statement. Who had been what? His best man. And you read that, and the translators are trying to help us understand just how close this person was. It was his closest friend. And so they translated it best man, and I suspect a part of that might be that there was that similarity to that culture and best men in our weddings, to his best friend. After a while, in the time of the wheat harvest, Samson visits his wife with a young goat, and he said, "Let me go into my wife, into her room." Her father would not permit him. Father said, "I really thought you hated her, and so I gave your companion. Now, she's got a younger sister better than she. Take her." Samson said, "This time I shall be blameless regarding the Philistines if I harm them." And so Samson does an amazing thing. And you can read this, and as you read his solution to it, you will be amazed what happens. Samson goes out and catches 300 foxes, ties their tails together, and puts a burning stick between the tails. And they run out into the wheat field. And verse 11 says, they go into the standing grain of the Philistine and burned up the shocks and the standing grain, as well as the vineyards and the olive groves. And I don't know, whenever I took time to think about 300 foxes. Chuck Reeves, if you had to get 300 foxes, how long would it take you? I mean, you stop and think about it. And when you got 299 of them, you're looking for the 300th one. You know what's going to happen to the 299? I mean, I never even thought about the enormity of what he was doing to gather the 300 foxes. I find that remarkable. But you can imagine what would happen. Here are these foxes, and there's a burning coal, there's a stick that's on fire between them. They're going to be running all over the place, and that ignites all of the wheat fields. And Samson says, I am justified in doing this. Well, because of that, the Philistines come up to the place where look at verse 8. He attacked them hip and thigh with a great slaughter. Hip and thigh, what does that mean? It's got to be a Jewish idiom, I guess. He attacks them hip and thigh. It may indicate the closeness of the battle. I'm not sure everything that is involved in it. I tried to figure out everything that was involved in it, but that's in, and he took revenge on them. And he goes to a place called Etam, and the Philistines went up and encamped in Judah and deployed themselves against Lehi, which is near where Samson was. And the men of Judah said to Samson, why have you come against us? We have come to arrest Samson, to do to him as he's done to us. I said, and so now they come against the Jews. We're going to punish you. 3,000 Jews. I want you to think of how many that is. 3,000 Jews go down to where Samson is and says, and look, they've given up. Do you not know that the Philistines rule over us? What is this you've done? And he said to them, as they did to me, so I've done to them. I haven't done anything wrong. I've just paid them back. And they said to him, we've come down to arrest you. These are the Jews, that we may deliver you into the hands of the Philistines. And Samson said to them, swear to me you'll not kill me yourself. So they spoke to him, saying, we will tie you securely and deliver you into their hands. And they bound him with 2 new ropes and brought him up from the rock. And when he came to Lehi, the Philistines came shouting against him. The Spirit of the Lord comes upon them, and he breaks the ropes as though they'd been burned with fire, and his hands are loose. He found a fresh jawbone of a donkey and reached out his hand and took it and killed 1,000 men with it. There are some amazing stories. We think we know the story of Samson, but are you learning some things you never thought about? And then he's thirsty. And he finds inside that jawbone, he finds some water that was in there. Verse 18 says, you have given this great deliverance by the hand of your servant, and I die of thirst. The Lord split the hollow place that is in Lehi. Well, Lehi may be the location. And the water came out, and he drank it, and his spirit was returned. He revived. Samson and Delilah. We got to go in a hurry. We'll look at this, and then we'll try to talk about it in detail, but this is the part of the story that we know about Samson and Delilah. Let me point out, because most people are not aware of this, that Delilah was not his wife. He's an immoral man. And so we need to be aware of that. He visited her. And when the Philistines find where he is, they come and they're ready to attack the city. And all Samson does is, during the night, he takes the gates of the cities, post and all, not just the gates, but what the center post, I guess, or however they would be attached, and he carries them away. You know how strong that is? I shall forever owe Rick Hall a word of thanks. He says, Dan, it's so easy for us when we think of Samson to think of somebody that's LeBron James size. If you'll make Samson a little short Jewish person, these stories become even more magnificent. And so I suspect Rick is right. But he carries away the gates of the city. Now then, the people of the city, having recognized what's happened, verse 5, the lords of the Philistines came to Delilah and said to her, entice him, find out where his great strength lies, and by what means we may overpower him, that we may bind him, and every one of us will give you 1,100 pieces of silver. She's not up and up honest, and so I've got it's 1,100 pieces times question mark, question mark. There's a lot of money involved here. And so she begins to tell Samson, and he begins to reveal his secret to her. I'll get caught up on this. He begins to reveal his secret to her. And as he reveals his secret to her, he says, here's what you need to do. If you, this is where I needed to be. He says, if you will bind me with new ropes. And so she's bound with new ropes. Philistines are here. He breaks the ropes. He says, if you will weave my hair with a loom, like you'd make cloth. The Philistines are here, and he's not even aware anything's happened. And he's getting closer to telling the source of his strength, and that is his devotion to God, evidenced by the fact his hair has not been cut. So finally she says, tell me honestly, and he says, if you'll shave my head. And the interesting thing is to read this story that said, when she said the Philistines are here, he was not aware of what had transpired. Was not aware the Lord had left him. Isn't that tragic? That could happen to us. It's happened to people that we know. And we may talk about this. We get a chance to talk about Samson being almost like the Jewish nation. And so the end results of this is they take Samson, he's powerless. They put out his eyes. He's now blind. And the Bible says that he becomes a grinder. And I'm not sure everything that is involved in this. Obviously, it's where they were grinding the grain, and in some way he's down there involved in that. Some have thought he might have been pushing the heavy stone around. But he's nothing more than an ordinary man. And then there is that feast, and Samson dies, and we'll talk about that next week. All right, I hope we'll get to those last 4 chapters next week. Thank you very much.